What were you doing the moment you realized COVID was shutting the whole world down? March 2020. I went to the grocery store to buy the 2 weeks worth of groceries so that my family could shelter in place. When I walked into the grocery store, the aisles were packed with people and the shelves were bare. I don't live in a hurricane zone, so I had never seen bare grocery shelves like that. It was very disconcerting. Luckily, I was able to find enough food, eventually. The moment I saw the inside of that grocery store is the moment that the pandemic started for me. March 11, 2020. I was traveling for work and watching the news in my hotel room. 1. Trump restricted all flights coming from Europe. 2. NBA canceled the rest of the season. 3. Tom Hanks announced he had COVID. The first two were huge moves and the third made me realize anyone can get it. It was very real after that. I lost my mom on March 10, 2020, non-COVID related. COVID shutdown happened approximate 10 days later, which made it extremely difficult to properly plan and hold her funeral. We were only allowed to have 10 guests and amenities were very limited. We had a much larger celebration of life later on, but this destroyed me for a long while. I still feel like she never had the service she deserved. I'm sorry, Mom. Edit. Added clarity, non-COVID. Edit. Thank you to everyone that left kind words and / or shared your story. I've read each comment. Truly means a lot. I was on my spring break from school and we got an email to all the students saying they were extended spring break another week so they could figure out what to do about all the classes. We ended up doing the rest of the year online. It was my senior year, so it was really weird not being able to finish in person and not walking across a physical stage. The exact moment? At work. Before that I was at work. Afterwards, I went back to work. So just going to add, I worked in the food supply chain, so nothing really changed logistically for us. Our company actually gave us little letters to keep in our car saying we were essential workers. I guess they assumed that we would be pulled over for being out during the lockdown. On March 6, 2020, I, 67F, fell and broke my hip. That led to an ambulance ride to the hospital, hip replacement surgery and an X-ray which detected lung cancer. No doctors were available to see me due to COVID. It was terrifying. I did receive chemo, radiation, and the removal of half of my left lung and remain cancer-free. I was in the hospital NICU with my wife who had just given birth to our baby girl. We were there for 5 days. When we went in everything was more or less status quo, and when we came out everything was locked down. Pretty surreal watching the hospital food court going from normal, to all the tables and chairs spaced apart, to no tables or chairs, to completely closed. Every time I went down to the main level more had changed. Then when we finally left I had a hell of a time finding formula with all the damn panic buyers. I'm in IT, so I was exhaustedly trying to explain how Zoom works to all the Luddite MBAs at corporate. I was about to sign a lease on a commercial unit as I was about to open a small business. I backed out, for obvious reasons. Feels weird to call it a moment. It had been in the news broadly since the new year turned. It was really more of a storm, a cloud rolling at you for a few months. Sitting at a bar getting drunk. 3+ years sober today. Working for the Department of Public Health. LOL. Went to Costco to grab toilet paper and the crowd was downright rabid. There was a line that snaked around the entire store, but there was no toilet paper left on the warehouse floor. They were bringing out forklifts with pallets of TP and yelling at people to stay back for their safety, but people were running up to the forklifts in a panic and ripping the packages of TP off before the pallet had hit the ground. Same thing with 50-pound bags of rice. It was at that moment that I knew shit was about to get wild. I worked with many people from China and learned about them shutting down first in December 2019. Then COVID moved to Europe. I figured it was a matter of time before it spread to the US. My son had karate, and he didn't want to attend on March 12th. I told him he should go because I had a feeling our time was up. I was right. I recall everything beginning to shut down March 13th. I called it early. I was over at my folks' place having dinner, watching the news, and they were talking about how bad it was overseas. I'm in USA. They had just started using words like quarantine and pandemic, and the steps Europe and Asia were taking to try and combat it. I just looked at my parents and said, this is about to get really bad. I was told I was being overdramatic, and this was gonna be like avian flu or SARS. A big ado about nothing. I pointed out that they were already talking about shutting down ports and airports, and we should be ready for when things started getting weird here. They didn't take it seriously. 2 months later, they were saying I didn't think it would be this bad. I wish someone had seen it coming. That was a seriously satisfying I told you so. Good thing I had laid in some supplies for myself as well as them. Although, I never anticipated the toilet paper riots of 2020. My wife was working as a nurse in the COVID unit, so basically praying she wasn't going to catch it and die or bring it home to one of our small kids. Lying in a hospital bed after getting a tumor removed, thinking I was about to live out 21 days later. I was at a KISS show in LA. Paul Stanley told everyone to be good to one another because of some bug moving around during the encore. They cancelled all their shows the next day, and I started getting emails from the city about things shutting down. March 8-ish 2020. Enjoyed the fact outside was empty. I followed the news as it progressed and already had the essentials short of perishables. I was getting my hair cut when they got the phone call that they'd need to shut effective EOD. I avoided the toilet and paper towel shortages. I was watching Boris Johnson announce lockdown live at home. Then texted all my friends the news. I was having dinner at my in-laws' place, making morbid comments about how bad I suspected it was going to get. During that very conversation, work called to let me know about my temporary layoff because we were shutting down. Already knew about COVID and its severity since like November. I was in my new district teaching my 3rd year there. There happened to be a large SE Asian population at our school, so naturally we had many Chinese students, and they would tell me about what was going on there from WeChat with their family and friends in China. I had already started converting most of my lessons into digital formats thankfully, but schools had not gone remote till it was well too late in terms of contraction rates in the US. I was thinking how well prepared I was compared to my colleagues, and while I loved being in the classroom with my kids, remote classes sounded a bit exciting. As a HS social studies teacher, I could do more as well as have less stress being able to work remotely without admin or parents for that matter breathing down my neck. A couple weeks later, as things got more serious across the globe, my admin gave me notice that despite having me on tenure track contract for 2 years remaining, they would be laying me off at the end of the school year, anticipating that remote learning would be a breeze and take over the education system, seeing no need to have extra teachers. Boy, were they wrong. I loved that district and stayed in touch with many of my students who graduated that year and the following year, but because of COVID it entirely ruined the career and profession that I loved so dearly. It became next near impossible to find any work outside of year's contract, let alone being offered tenure track. I was forced to leave this profession because of how unsustainable employment became, because admin and districts knew it was cheaper to do so to teachers. There's a great deal of things wrong with our education system, even in some of the best, most liberal states where I come from, especially since COVID, but I could no longer literally afford to be somewhere where nobody was willing to invest in me, and more importantly our students. I left this past year and couldn't be happier with where I am in life. Even though the transition has not been the easiest, it's removed a lot of stress out of my life and simplified many things as well. In January, when the breaking news account posted photos of roads closed in Wuhan with bulldozer loads of dirt, it struck me as a desperate act to stop the outward flow of traffic after a mysterious flu was reported. Me and my wife went to Costco that weekend and stocked up for like a year, slightly smiling face. I believe it was January 26th. I don't watch the news, so I didn't realize how bad it was getting. I remember being at the gym in the locker room and I thought it was odd that there was literally no one else there. I took a picture. There are signs everywhere that say no phones, and then I stopped going for more than 2 years. Walking my dogs. Saw the NBA season was cancelled. Don't really care for basketball, but knew that meant bad things. Next day, walking my dogs. Governor Inslee cancels school in Washington for the rest of the year. Oddly enough, post-COVID, my dogs don't want to walk as much, since they already get so much human times. Recovering from bronchitis, am 99% sure it was COVID, but they were super stingy with tests back then. Getting ready to take my 4-year-old to Disney on Ice. The event was cancelled hours before it was scheduled. I was at the Big 12 basketball tournament. There were 2 games that night and they played the first one but cancelled the second one. News was starting to trickle out about COVID, but no one really knew what it was yet. Because of that we talked the whole way there about whether or not we should go. K-State beat TCU in the only game played that tournament, which I think should have made us B12 tournament champions that year despite being an incredibly low seed. Trying to leave an abusive marriage. Was given 2 months off. Government paid $2,000 each month, no questions asked. My wife suggested that I treat it like retirement. What would you do if you were retired? Exercised, went for walks, made great dinners. Relaxed. Went back to work 2 months later. I was working for the biggest healthcare supply company in the US. If I remember well, we were told to stop coming to the office in January. Our sales were skyrocketing and at one point during the pandemic, we were landing a cargo jumbo jet every day in some city in the US. We were aware that the March lockdown was coming well before it happened. I was working 6 days a week, 11 to 12 hours a day. Massive profits for the company. Zero bonus for yours truly. I live in Kansas City and the first signs were the last-minute cancellation of our St. Patrick's Day parade and the decision to play the games of a college basketball tournament we were hosting without fans before the remainder of the games, and all the fan events were cancelled outright. Even then I just thought, wow, that's big, but these are big events with big crowds, that's all it will be. Then my wife and I were at a Mexican restaurant, and noticed it wasn't very busy. Suddenly the manager called all the servers over for an emergency meeting over in the corner. While that was happening, I got a breaking news update that all bars and restaurants would have to shut down. That was pretty shocking. I then salted the tortilla chips, set the salt shaker back down, and started to reach for a chip. Suddenly I said to my wife, I never thought of this until now, but it's really disgusting that we use restaurant salt shakers that hundreds of people have handled, and got up to go wash my hands before eating any more chips. Wondering if I should celebrate my birthday by going out or staying in. I opted to stay in. Working. Then around March 16th, I had to stay home. Sitting in a bar in Laos wondering how the fuck I was gonna get home. I just bought a bike and cycled every day. We had 2 months of non-stop sun, which is unheard in Ireland. Lost 10 kilos, honestly I actually enjoyed it. Working. Worked as a waiter in a restaurant at the time. Ended up having all those months off. Besides the obvious negative things that COVID brought, those months of downtime were honestly magical. Felt like life finally slowed down for a moment and I could take a breath of fresh air and enjoy it. Sometimes I'll hear songs or see trends that were popular back then and it bring back the memories.